Okay, I'm supposed to talk about alfalfa production, and I'll try to do the best from the establishment to harvest. If you have any questions, keep it in mind, and I'll try to answer it later on. But I will talk in general what is the best practice for alfalfa in Western Canada. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have gone past that. So I think just to give you some idea how alfalfa is important. Alfalfa is by far the most important forage crop in Western Canada. And in fact, it is also the most important forage crop in the whole world. And I think we grow quite a bit of alfalfa in Canada and Alberta and Western Canada in general. And there is also enough uh, alfalfa grown in Eastern Canada too. We go to why we consider alfalfa. Alfalfa is the most widely used forage legume in Western Canada. Is grown in 2.6 million hectares, which is probably a very large area compared to other crops. It is widely adapted. That's why it is grown in such a wide area. It is quick to establish, and it produces high forage yield and quality. And the other important thing is cattle performance and preference is fairly high for this crop. One other important thing we have noticed in recent years is because of its deep taproot system and extensive root system, it can help improve carbon sequestration if we are growing alfalfa compared to other forages. And because of all this, I think alfalfa is often considered the queen of forages. But this queen of forages has some weaknesses too. And these are the weaknesses. It is rather difficult to establish if you don't practice if you don't follow all the good protocols. It will not establish well. It can cause bloat, which is a major problem. Cannot survive in mixed stands, and it's mainly because how they are bred. Most of the varieties are bred for pure culture and for hay production. Limited tolerance to acid or saline soil. We now have some varieties that have tolerance to acid or saline soil, but in the past we didn't have that. And that is why majority of the alfalfa varieties um, grown or sold in Western Canada do not have tolerance to um, these conditions. And many of these species, many of the varieties are prone to serious diseases, particularly when there is good moisture condition. Under dry land condition in Western Canada, you don't see disease. In fact, for my disease nursery, I have to go to BC. I can't have disease developed here in spite of the fact we have irrigation and we are prepared to even spray all night and all that. Still, we don't develop disease for, for screening for making selections. That's why I have my disease nursery in Creston, BC. The other important thing is it has low tolerance to frequent cutting. That is one thing you have to remember. If you cut it frequently, it will not survive for long. It will give you high quality hay, but it will not survive for long. So what do we do? How do we maximize our production? Is we have to pay attention in the very beginning to establishment part. And then we have to also make sure we do the right things for maintenance of the crop, for its longevity, and at the same time, we have to pay attention to harvest at harvest time so that we don't reduce its longevity or produce poor quality hay. So let's go into the establishment part. Forage establishment is very important to choose appropriate cultivar. If you are not choosing appropriate cultivar for your purpose, then you may not get may not maximize your productivity, and also product not only productivity of the forage but also productivity of the animals. Prepare seed bed carefully. That is a basic thing. I think everybody has to do that. Prepare seed appropriately. Seed shallow in early spring. Seed only perennial forage crops. That means do not mix with annuals with perennial forages. Give the stand a mowing when the crop is about 20 to 25%, 20 to 25 centimeters high. I will deal with these individually in a little more detail. So when I say appropriate cultivar, choose appropriate cultivar for your purpose. That means if you are growing for hay, it would be a very different thing than if you are trying to graze your stand. So if you are trying to grow for one cut system or 2, 3 cut system, you have to also choose varieties accordingly, because some varieties are good for just one cut, particularly in dry areas. In Western Canada, we get only one cut, one major cut, and after that it does not grow back to give you a second crop. But in some areas where it would give you one good cut, but it grows back a little bit because of some rain afterwards, and that stand can be grazed. So you have to choose your variety so that you don't miss out on those. Choose cultivar known for their adaptation to your condition. That is the most important part. When a breeder is breeding a variety, he is making selection on the basis of phenotype. And phenotype takes into account the genotype of the plant, the environment under which it is growing, and the interaction between the genotype and the environment. So when they are making the selection, they are making sure that it is adapted, and then it is tested widely so that we realize where this variety would be adapted to before it is released. So pay attention to those. And then finally, if the soil is saline or acidic, look for cultivars with those attributes. If specifically, if you have some kind of a weakness in your soil, you have to make sure that you tailor your variety so that would grow in that environment or was produced for that purpose. That means it is adapted to acid or saline soils. Then the other important thing is under irrigation, particularly, as I said, the disease resistance is a major consideration. If it is very, very dry, then you don't have to worry about disease because it would not develop that much disease. But under irrigation, I think I have this picture here. You can see those two, they are under irrigation. That's why some of those varieties have completely overtaken by dandelion. It looks very good, but it's no good for hay. But there are some varieties that would have high resistance for disease, which would survive for long. This is a 6-year-old stand, and it still is fairly green, but some of the other ones have completely died off. That is why I think disease resistance is very important when you have good moisture condition. And for direct grazing, choose cultivars that are adapted to grazing and can grow with sandfoin. I think there is another crop, sandfoin, which has condensed tannins in it. If you grow with alfalfa, it prevents bloat completely. So if you, first of all, you have to have alfalfa that was developed for grazing tolerance. We have some varieties now that has some grazing tolerance, and we should also think of varieties that can grow with sandfoin. Most varieties, most alfalfas would grow with sandfoin without any trouble. Sandfoin is not as competitive as alfalfa is. So I think most of them would do well with alfalfa, but at the same time, you have to see which one would suit your purpose. Seed bed, I think most of you probably know if you are growing any kind of crop, seed bed is very, very important. You have to um, prepare a good seed bed. But the most important part of growing alfalfa is the seed bed needs to be firm. Why? Because otherwise, when you are drilling the seed, it would go too deep. Alfalfa seed is a very tiny seed and it does not have the energy necessary from coming from deeper profile. That is why we have to seed it about half an inch to maximum 3/4 of an inch deep. Otherwise, your stand will not be very uniform. To make it uniform and very productive quickly, you have to seed it between half an inch to 3/4 inch deep. And that can only be attained if your seed bed is relatively firm and also completely weed free. Legumes require inoculation. Everybody knows that. So we have to make sure you inoculate your seed before you think of planting this. Otherwise, you won't have the nitrogen fixation you are looking for. And in fact, even the growth of the crop is not very good. Some seed requires scarification. I think most alfalfa have some hard seeds in them, but they are not a very high proportion of seed is not hard seed, so you don't need to scarify. But if you are seeding something like a Sisal milk vetch or some seed with a hard seed coat, then you have to scarify it. In addition to inoculation, you have to scarify the seed before you plant it. Otherwise, again, it won't germinate quickly or uniformly. Other important thing to pay attention to is have the proper seeding equipment. And in my opinion, or what we have seen by seeding with a seeder that has packers on both in the front of the seed drill and the back of the seed where the seed is dropped, it works very well because the front packs the seed bed and after that the seed is dropped and then the following wheel puts the soil on top of it. When it is in contact with the soil, germination is very good and you will have very rapid growth from that kind of a seeding operation. One other thing to pay attention to is check the seed setting so that it is uniformly distributed, not clumps of seed in one place and there is nothing for half an inch or half a meter, half a feet or half a meter or something like that. That would not give you a very good stand, uniform stand. That is why I say that carefully check the seed setting and you should know how much you are seeding. It's very important to have appropriate seeding rate. If you are seeding alfalfa for example for seed production, you may have to only seed 3-4 pounds per acre. But if you are seeding for hay, that would be too sparse stand and it would encourage all kinds of weeds and everything to invade and it would not give you the yield, forage yield you are looking for. For forage purposes, you have to seed between 12 to 15 pounds per acre, whereas if you are growing for seed, it can be sparse. It does not have to be very thick stand. And in fact, even for good seed production, we plant them in wider rows too, not 6-8 inches, which we use for hay production. As I said earlier, seed only perennial alfalfa crop or a perennial forage mixture. Don't seed annuals with it because it's intuitively you can think annual crop has to complete its life cycle within 90 to 100 days, whereas alfalfa has to survive over years. And that is the reason why annual crops grow from the very beginning very rapidly normally they have much larger seed, and then they also grow much rapidly from at the seedling stage. That masks the poor small seeded alfalfa seedlings from expressing itself or growing very rapidly. That is why I say that don't use a annual crop. Some people used to even say that that's our nurse crop. There is no such thing as a nurse crop. No crop nurses another crop. It actually vigorously competes with it. So try to minimize the competition if you can by only putting perennial crops together if you have to. But if you want a pure stand of alfalfa, then I would say that just seed alfalfa. And the main reason why some people do that is plant an annual crop with it is because they say that in the first year, alfalfa will take too long and not produce enough biomass. So that to compensate for that, they would like to have an annual crop with it. But if you do everything right, if you if your protocols are all right, then you will get a very good crop of alfalfa in the very first year. That first year itself will give you a very good crop. So you don't need to reduce. And if you put annual companion crop, not only reduces the yield in the first year, but that loss lasts for 3, 4 more years. And I'm just not saying it from top of my head. We had done experiments in Lethbridge. Our weed scientists had done experiments to actually prove that that effect from the very first year does not go for 3, 4 years. So uh, um, don't make it worse for the crop. And finally, if you did everything right and if you had a good stand, even then your work is not done, because the very first year you will see some annual weeds growing with them. To reduce their effect, to reduce their those weeds from going into seed, you should give it a mowing. That not only takes out all the annual seed heads and things like that, but also helps alfalfa to stool out and cover ground quickly. And that is the main reason why I say this will prevent annual weeds produce seed, help the perennial alfalfa plants to stool out and cover ground quickly, resulting in a weed-free and high-yielding stand. So if you did everything right, this would be the first year's crop. Perfectly growing crop, it would even yield about 3 tons per acre. So if you are going to get this kind of biomass and everything in the very first year and good high quality forage, why not just try all these good practices for doing it? And it will be completely weed free if you take care of everything. Then I think stand maintenance, I think alfalfa is a very aggressive crop. It normally does not require very much attention for stand maintenance. But again, if you are in a drier area or if you have irrigation facility, please make sure that you irrigate it. I think maintenance is important when you have an irrigated land, because when you irrigate when you irrigate normally, the roots stay on the top part of the soil profile. It does not penetrate very much unless you are very careful in how to irrigate it properly. It would stay on the surface on the top part of the profile, so it needs that irrigation. And soon after cutting, if you provide irrigation, you will see a major boost in the productivity. That is the main reason why those who are growing alfalfa for dairy farm, what dairy farmers do, they normally cut it and take it away right away. They do not keep it in the soil for curing. They do not make hay. They most of the time use silage, and they take it out right away and can irrigate immediately. And that immediate application of water sometimes increases the biomass yield by 20% over the year. In our area, I think in near Lethbridge, many of these dairy farmers, they have always said that this is why they do it. They immediately irrigate. But if you are doing for making hay, you cannot take the crop out right away. You have to leave it for 4 or 5 days. We are very fortunate in southern Alberta. We have dry wind, strong dry wind, which cures our uh, hay very quickly. That is why in 3 or 4 days the producers can take their hay out of the field. But no matter when you can take the hay out, please irrigate right away. That would have a positive impact. And if you have any other specific questions, I'll try to answer. But for harvesting, the most important thing to remember is don't harvest it when it is completely in vegetative stage. Just like from even what Mike said, that it probably would give you too good a quality hay, which you don't need for cow calf operation. You may benefit if you are growing dairy cows, if you are feeding it to dairy cows, but it would be too high the quality for cow calf or for older cows. So I think try to take it at 5 to 10% bloom when you have the maximum productivity also. After that, the productivity may increase, but that increase is because of increase in the lignin content and things like that in the stem, which makes it more or less digestible. It has more ADF, NDF, and less protein because it drops some of the bottom leaves. So for high quality and good yield, take the harvest at 5 to 10% bloom. One other important thing I should probably mention, in Western Canada, for Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba, we use a practice that says that don't take a cut during the month of September. You don't have to literally take it from 1st of September to the end of September, but the main idea is don't take a cut during that part of the year when the plant is trying to send some photosynthate into their crown area for their overwintering properly. If you take a cut deep into September, uh, then the crop may try to grow again after that because there is still growing period left. And as a consequence, the crown will not be going into winter in a very, very strong or very healthy situation. So we have seen that if we take a cut in the middle of September, we are making the crop prone to winter kill. So even in a dry area, I think we can have winter kill if we are not careful about that cutting. And we normally get 2 to 3 cuts in Lethbridge area, and normally it is 2, but in some years we can get 3. But if we irrigate it properly and things like that, we will get 3 cuts almost every year. For experimental purposes, we normally get 3 cuts. So that is all I would say for alfalfa production. If you have any specific questions, I'll try to answer.